Deep in the red rock canyons of what we now call Jordan, there was once a fortress that seemed impregnable, a kingdom carved into the very cliffs, where men lived like eagles, looking down upon the world with a sneer of superiority. They felt safe. They felt untouchable. But while they were watching the horizon for earthly armies, they failed to notice a divine decree being written against them in the heavens. This is not just a history of a lost civilization. It is a story of a family torn apart, a twin brother who stood by and laughed while his brother bled. It is the story of the Book of Obadiah, the shortest book in the Old Testament, but perhaps the loudest warning ever whispered to the heart of man. If you have ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone who should have loved you, or wondered why God allows the proud to flourish, this message is for you. To understand the fire in the words of the prophet Obadiah, we have to travel back long before the vision was ever seen. We have to go back to a tent in the desert where two brothers were born, Jacob and Esau, twins, yet opposites in every way. One, a quiet dweller of tents, the other, a rugged hunter of the field. The Bible tells us that the struggle began even before they took their first breath. They wrestled in the womb of their mother, Rebekah. Esau was the firstborn, the heir to the blessing, the man of the red earth. But he was a man of the moment, a man who traded his eternal birthright for a single bowl of red lentil stew. Jacob, the supplanter through cunning and deceit, took what Esau had discarded. And in that moment of theft and hunger, a seed of bitter hatred was planted. Esau said in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Though the brothers would eventually reconcile in a tearful embrace years later, the nations that came from their loins, Israel from Jacob and Edom from Esau, never did. They became two neighbors, divided by a mountain of resentment. Edom settled in the rugged, mountainous region of Mount Seir. They were the red people living in the red rocks. They became wealthy, they became wise in the ways of the world, and they became incredibly proud. They looked down from their high mountain passes at the children of Israel and remembered. They remembered the stolen blessing. They remembered the ancient grudge. For centuries, Edom watched Israel's struggles with a cold, calculating eye. They weren't just enemies, they were brother enemies. And in the eyes of God, that kinship carried a responsibility that Edom would eventually and catastrophically betray. The Book of Obadiah begins not with a history lesson, but with a vision, a divine broadcast from the throne of the Almighty. The Lord God speaks, and he calls for an envoy to be sent among the nations. The message is clear: arise, and let us rise up against her for battle. But why? What could a small nation tucked away in the rocks have done to stir the wrath of the Creator of the universe? The answer lies in the silence of Edom during Israel's darkest hour. It lies in the pride of the heart that deceives a man into thinking he is his own God. As we peel back the layers of this ancient prophecy, we see a mirror of our own world, a world where people stand on their high rocks of wealth, status, and technology, thinking they are beyond the reach of justice. Stay with us as we witness the moment the fortress of rock begins to crumble, and the brother of the red earth faces the King of Kings. The year is 586 before Christ. A thick, suffocating smoke rises from the Judean hills, turning the midday sun into a ghostly copper disk. The city of Jerusalem, the city of David, the place where the temple of the living God stood in gold and cedar, is screaming. The Babylonian war machine, led by Nebuchadnezzar, has finally breached the walls. The sound is a deafening chorus of crashing stones, the clanging of bronze swords, and the desperate cries of a people who thought they were abandoned by heaven. But as the walls crumble and the fire begins to consume the holy places, another sound can be heard, a sound that cuts deeper than the Babylonian blade. It is the sound of laughter, it is the sound of cheering, and it is coming from the south, from the ridges of Mount Seir. It is the voice of Edom. To understand the weight of the Book of Obadiah, we must look through the eyes of the Judean refugees. Imagine you are a father, clutching your child, running through the narrow, burning streets. You look up toward the hills, hoping to see a hand of help from your kinsman. These are the Edomites. They share your blood. They share the stories of Isaac and Abraham. They are the sons of your father's brother. Surely in this moment of total annihilation, the ancient grudge will be forgotten. Surely the bond of brotherhood will prevail. But as you reach the crossroads, gasping for air, you don't find a helping hand. You find an ambush. The prophet Obadiah, through his divine vision, stands as a cosmic prosecutor. He lists the crimes of Edom not as political mistakes, but as spiritual betrayals that cry out to the very throne of God. He uses a series of do-nots words that echo through the centuries as a warning to every soul that has ever felt a secret joy in someone else's failure. You should not have gloated over your brother in the day of his misfortune, Obadiah proclaims. The Hebrew word for gloat implies a wide-eyed, malicious staring. The Edomites didn't just watch. They feasted their eyes on the destruction. They stood on the sidelines of history and enjoyed the show. To God, this was the first step of their descent into darkness. There is a specific kind of evil that finds pleasure in the suffering of others, especially when that other is a brother. It is the sin of the heart before it becomes the sin of the hand. But it didn't stop at watching. Obadiah continues his indictment, his voice rising with the fire of justice. He speaks of how Edom rejoiced over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction. They didn't just observe, they celebrated. They threw a festival while Zion wept. For a Christian audience today, this serves as a haunting reminder of the Apostle Paul's warning to weep with those who weep. Edom did the opposite. They laughed where they should have mourned. As the Babylonian soldiers moved through the city, stripping the gold from the temple and carrying away the sacred vessels, the Edomites followed like scavengers. Obadiah accuses them of entering the gates of God's people and looting their wealth in the day of their disaster. They were not the primary invaders, but they were the opportunists who picked the pockets of the dying. They took advantage of a brother's vulnerability to increase their own stores. How often in our modern world do we see this same spirit? The spirit that sees a neighbor's crisis not as a call to help, but as a chance to profit. But the final crime, the one that seals the fate of Edom, is the most cold-blooded of all. As the survivors of Jerusalem managed to slip through the Babylonian lines, fleeing into the wilderness toward the desert, they reached the narrow passes and the crossroads. There, standing in the shadows, were the men of Edom. They didn't stand there to guide the refugees to safety. They stood there to cut down those who escaped. Can you picture the cruelty of that moment? A weary mother, a wounded soldier, a terrified child, thinking they have finally reached the safety of their brother's borders, only to find the brother of the Red Earth waiting with a sword. Those Edom didn't kill. They delivered up, handing them over to the Babylonians as slaves. They betrayed the most sacred law of the desert, the law of hospitality. They sold their own flesh and blood to the enemy for the sake of political favor. This is the shadow over Jerusalem that Obadiah captures so vividly. It is a portrait of a heart that has become as hard as the red rocks of Petra. Edom believed that by siding with the powerful Babylonians and crushing their weak brother, they were being wise. They thought they were securing their own future. They thought that because they lived in the high, hidden places of the mountains, the consequences of their betrayal would never reach them. But the prophet Obadiah carries a different message. He tells them that God was watching. God was in the burning streets of Jerusalem. God was at the crossroads where the refugees were captured. And God was in the heart of the Edomite who felt no pity. Obadiah's words remind us that silence in the face of injustice is not neutral. Watching a brother fall and doing nothing or worse, cheering for his demise, is an affront to the Creator who made us all. The shadow that fell over Jerusalem that day did not just cover the ruins of the temple, it covered the soul of Edom. And as the smoke of the city drifted south toward the mountains of Seir, it carried with it the scent of a judgment that was already on the move. For the believer listening today, this part of the story is a call to examine our own hearts. Do we stand at the crossroads of our brother's need with a helping hand, or do we stand there with a cold heart, waiting to see if his misfortune might somehow benefit us? The tragedy of Edom is the tragedy of the lost brother, the one who forgot that blood is thicker than water, and that the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeing every act of betrayal. The high rocks of Edom might have been strong, but they were not higher than the justice of the Almighty. The cheers of the Edomites would soon turn into cries of their own, for the day of the Lord was drawing near, a day when every debt would be settled and every betrayal would be brought into the light. If you were to travel south from Jerusalem today, across the scorched valleys and into the rugged wilderness of the Arabah, you would encounter a landscape that looks like the surface of another planet. This is the land of Edom, the ancestral home of the descendants of Esau. And at the heart of this land lies a city that has captured the imagination of travelers for millennia, a city carved directly into the blood-red sandstone cliffs. In ancient times it was called Selah. Today, we know it as Petra. To understand the prophecy of Obadiah, you must understand the geography of Edom. The Edomites did not live in the open plains where an enemy could easily march upon them. No, they lived in the clefts of the rock. They dwelt in the high places, in natural fortresses, accessible only through narrow, winding canyons, where a handful of men could hold off an entire army. From their eagles' nests in the mountains of Seir, the Edomites looked down upon the rest of the Middle East with a sense of absolute invincibility. They believed their geography was their salvation. They believed the rocks themselves were their gods. But Obadiah's message strikes at the very heart of this security. The Lord speaks through him, saying, "The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high. You who say in your heart, 'Who will bring me down to the ground?'" Brothers and sisters, listen to those words. The pride of your heart has deceived you. This is the central theme of Part 3. Pride is not just a feeling of superiority, it is a spiritual blindness. It is the lie that tells us we are self-sufficient, that we are the masters of our own destiny, and that we are beyond the reach of divine justice. Edom's pride was built on 3 pillars: their impenetrable fortresses, their vast wealth gathered from the trade routes, and their legendary wisdom. The Edomites were known throughout the ancient world for their sages and their intellect. Even in the Book of Job, we see companions who hailed from Teman, a major city in Edom. They thought they were too smart to be tricked, too rich to be bought, and too high to be toppled. But God has a way of turning human wisdom into foolishness when it is used to justify cruelty. Obadiah issues a challenge that must have sounded terrifying to the ears of the Edomites. "Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord." Imagine the eagle, the king of the birds, floating effortlessly above the world, thinking nothing can touch it. That was Edom. But no mountain is too high for the one who created the mountains. No fortress is too strong for the one who established the foundations of the earth. The prophet then describes the nature of their downfall. It wouldn't be a dignified defeat, it would be a total stripping. He uses a powerful analogy. If thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, how you are destroyed. Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleanings? In the ancient world, even thieves had a limit. They took what they could carry and left the rest. Even the harvesters, according to the law of Moses, were supposed to leave the gleanings, the bits of fruit left on the vine, for the poor and the stranger. But the judgment coming for Edom would leave no gleanings. It would be a total search. Every hidden treasure in their mountain caves would be dragged into the light. Every secret store of grain and gold would be pillaged. The very things they relied on for security would become the bait that drew their enemies in. But the most stinging part of the judgment was how it would happen. It wouldn't just be an outside army, it would be a betrayal from within. Obadiah reveals that Edom's own allies, the people they shared bread with, the nations they had signed treaties with to crush Israel, would be the ones to turn against them. All the men of your confederacy have led you to the border. The men who were at peace with you have deceived you and prevailed against you. This is the divine irony of the Book of Obadiah. Edom betrayed their brother Israel to gain the favor of the powerful. And now, the powerful would betray Edom to gain their wealth. They would be driven out of their own land by the very people they trusted. their wisdom would fail them in the moment they needed it most. God promised to destroy the wise men from Edom and understanding from the mountain of Esau. When God withdraws his light, even the most brilliant mind becomes a labyrinth of confusion. As we visualize this, we see the mighty warriors of Teman men, known for their bravery and their tactical skill, standing paralyzed with fear. Your mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that everyone from the mountain of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. The mountain that once echoed with the sounds of commerce and celebration would soon echo with the silence of the grave. Why does God focus so much on Edom's pride? Because pride is the root of their violence against Israel. If you think you are an eagle, you feel justified in tearing apart the lambs. If you think you are sitting among the stars, you feel no empathy for those struggling in the dust. Edom's geographical height had created a spiritual distance. They had forgotten that they were made of the same red clay as the brother they were mocking. For the American listener today, this section of Obadiah is a profound warning. We live in a world of high rocks. We have our technological fortresses, our economic walls, and our intellectual ivory towers. We often feel that the chaos of the world cannot reach us, that we are too big to fail or too smart to be deceived. But the message of the prophet remains unchanged. Any security that is not built on the righteousness of God is a deception of the heart. The ruins of Petra stand today as a silent monument to the truth of Obadiah's words. The eagle's nests are empty. The carvings in the rock remain, but the people who boasted in them are gone, vanished into the shadows of history. They were brought down not just by an army, but by the weight of their own arrogance. As the sun sets over the red mountains of Seir, we see the end of human pride. But the story does not end in the rubble of Edom. The prophecy now shifts its gaze. From the fallen mountains of the proud, it looks toward a different mountain, a mountain that Edom despised, but a mountain that God had chosen for his eternal throne. We are moving from the pride of the high rocks to the glory of Zion. We are moving from the judgment of the betrayer to the restoration of the betrayed. Stay with us as we enter the final part of this journey, where the day of the Lord brings a justice that no wall can stop and a hope that no fire can consume. The wind that howls through the empty, red rock canyons of Edom carries a message that has echoed through the corridors of time for over 2.5 millennia. It is a message of the day of the Lord. In the Hebrew scriptures, this is the Yom Yahweh, not a 2-4-hour period, but a definitive moment in history when the Creator steps out of the shadows of mystery and into the light of absolute justice. For Edom, the day of the Lord was a day of reckoning, but for the broken, battered remnant of Israel, it was a day of dawn after a long, dark night. Obadiah stands on the precipice of this divine future and issues a decree that is the foundation of biblical justice. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reprisal shall return upon your own head. This is the law of the harvest. The Edomites had stood by while Jerusalem was looted. Now they would be looted. They had captured the refugees at the crossroads. Now they would find no escape when their own borders were breached. Brothers and sisters, consider the weight of those words. As you have done, it shall be done to you. It is a sobering mirror held up to the face of humanity. It tells us that God is not a disinterested observer of our choices. He is the guardian of the moral order. When Edom drank in celebration on the holy mountain of Zion, cheering for the destruction of the temple, they were unknowingly drinking from a different cup, the cup of God's wrath. Obadiah uses a vivid, almost terrifying image of this cup. He says that just as Edom drank on the holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. In the Bible, the cup often represents the destiny one is given. To drink the cup of the Lord is to face the full consequences of one's rebellion. Edom thought they were the ones presiding over the feast of history, but they were actually the ones being served the wine of judgment. But the prophecy does not end in a graveyard. If Obadiah's message stopped at the destruction of Edom, it would be a book of vengeance. Instead, it is a book of restoration. The camera of the prophet's vision pans away from the smoldering ruins of Mount Seir and tilts upward toward the heights of Mount Zion. But on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. Think about the state of Israel when these words were spoken. They were in exile. Their walls were down. Their temple was a charcoal ruin. To speak of possessing their possessions seemed like a cruel joke to a people sitting by the rivers of Babylon. Yet, Obadiah speaks with the certainty of someone who has seen the end of the movie. He sees a day when holiness, not just ritual purity, but the actual presence of God, will return to the mountain. He sees a people who were once scattered like dust, being gathered back like grain. The imagery then shifts to a powerful metaphor of fire. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. They shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain to the house of Esau. For the Lord has spoken. In the dry, parched lands of the Middle East, there is nothing more terrifying or more thorough than a field fire. Stubble, the dry, leftover stalks of grain, has no power to resist the flame. It vanishes in a hiss and a puff of smoke. Obadiah is telling us that the invincible pride of Edom is nothing more than dry stubble when it meets the holy fire of God's people restored. The house of Esau would eventually disappear from the pages of history. By the time of the New Testament, the Edomites had been absorbed into other nations, and after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, they vanished entirely. The eagle's nest was truly brought down. But the restoration of Israel is not just about regaining a small strip of land. Obadiah describes an expansion that goes far beyond the old borders. He speaks of the people of the Negev possessing Mount Esau, and the people of the Shephelah possessing the land of the Philistines. He sees the kingdom growing, stretching out its arms to encompass the fields of Ephraim and the land of Gilead. It is a vision of a great restoration, a world being put back together piece by piece. And why? Why does all of this happen? Is it just for the sake of one nation? No. The final verse of Obadiah is the climax of the entire Old Testament story. It is the destination toward which all of history is marching. Saviors shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. The kingdom shall be the Lord's. In those 6 words, the prophet answers the deepest ache of the human heart. We live in a world where the kingdom often belongs to the cruel, the proud, and the betrayers. We live in a world of Edoms and Babylons. But Obadiah promises a day when the throne of the world will be occupied by its rightful owner. The saviors or deliverers who go up to Mount Zion are a foreshadowing of the ultimate deliverer, the one who would come from the line of Jacob to bring a kingdom that is not built on the sword, but on the cross. When we look at the book of Obadiah, we see that God is the God of the little people. He is the God who notices when a brother is betrayed in a narrow pass. He is the God who remembers the cries of the refugees. And He is the God who ensures that in the end, love wins, justice prevails, and the pride of man is laid low so that the glory of God can fill the earth. The story of Obadiah tells us that no matter how high you build your Petra, if it is built on the suffering of others, it will fall. But no matter how deep your Jerusalem is buried in ashes, if it is held by the hand of God, it will rise again. The kingdom does not belong to the eagles of the rock. It belongs to the Lamb on the mountain. We have traveled today from the ancient wombs of Rebekah to the red cliffs of Petra, and finally to the heights of a restored Zion. The book of Obadiah may be the shortest book in our Old Testament, but as we have seen, its message is massive. It is a warning against the Edom that lives inside each of us, that part of our heart that wants to feel superior, that wants to look away when a brother is in trouble, or that thinks we are safe because of our wealth or our walls. But more than a warning, it is a promise. It tells us that God is the King of history. He sees the crossroads of our lives. He knows when we have been betrayed, and He promises that He will be our vindicator. In a world that often feels like it's being run by the Oberkandelovs and the Pilates, Obadiah reminds us that the final word never belongs to the proud. The final word belongs to the Lord. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with me today, diving deep into this neglected corner of the Bible. It is in these small books that we often find the most contemporary God, a God who cares about justice, brotherhood, and the restoration of all things. If this journey through the prophecy of Obadiah has moved you or given you a new perspective on God's justice, please subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon so you never miss another story of faith. Your support allows us to keep bringing these ancient scriptures to life for a modern world. Please like this video and share it with your church groups, your family, or anyone you know who is walking through a season of betrayal. Let them know that God sees them and that the kingdom shall be the Lord's. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. How does the story of Jacob and Esau's descendants change the way you look at your own relationships? Do you see the pride of the rocks in our culture today? Let's talk about it. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the breathtaking narratives of the Holy Bible. Until then, walk in humility, love your brother, and keep your eyes on the mountain of the Lord. God bless you all.